Today's exposition is on the elusive concept of cognitive biases. In this episode, we're going to introduce a computational view of what a cognitive bias is. But first, we need to understand the history of the term cognitive bias. Around the 1970s, two psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, introduced the world to the concept of cognitive bias. Cognitive biases are said to be a systematic error in thinking that lead us to make mistakes. Some aspects about cognitive biases have been disproven in recent years. Many famous cognitive biases are no longer said to be universally entrenched in the behavior of our species. However, those cognitive biases are often still relevant on an individual level. One of the most notable cognitive bias is the hot hand fallacy. If an investor has made multiple good investments in a row, we may mistakenly believe that they are sure to make another good one. Self-affirmation bias is another cognitive bias that often affects investment decisions. If a plan relying on some degree of luck turns out beneficial, an investor might take credit for it, only to blame others when probability doesn't work out in their favor. Everyone knows about hindsight bias, or at least they should have known about it by now. After a market crash, you'll often find plenty of talking heads on TV claiming that the entire situation was avoidable. This leads us to the phrase, hindsight is 20/20. So what is a cognitive bias really? To understand, we need to learn another word. The word is heuristic. A heuristic is like a neat trick you've learned to cut through complexity. One might even call it a life hack. A heuristic may work one day, then on another day it might lead you astray. Evolution loves to ingrain heuristics into the behavior of all animals. Heuristics are why the spider spins a web, why a bird builds a nest, and why the chicken crosses the road. Cognitive biases, on the other hand, are like heuristics that have been misplaced. Vestigial organs are organs that seemingly no longer serve a purpose. It was once thought that the appendix was a vestigial organ. But we now know it serves as a safe house for good bacteria. Sure, you can live without an appendix, but that doesn't mean we should all get an appendectomy. The same goes for avoiding our cognitive biases. One man's heuristic is another man's cognitive bias. And you may have no clue whatsoever which is which. To draw a distinction between heuristics and cognitive biases is often fallacious. One reason being is the fallacy known as post hoc ergo propter hoc. This fallacy is a mistaken belief that because Y follows from X, X must cause Y. Much like the appendix, a cognitive bias can turn out to locally be a good thing. Once again, this leads us to the phrase, hindsight is 20/20. However, even the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy is nothing more than a heuristic. To accuse your opponent of a local fallacy is like placing an inedible garnish alongside a meal. It is not to be taken seriously, but rather to add some pretty artificial ambiance. If the ambient space changes, so does the particle within. We covered this dynamic in the episode on quasi-particles. If the space around a person changes, so does the value of their heuristics. Their thinking may no longer be fallacious in a new environment. This introduces us to the concept of a greedy algorithm. We're going to generalize the concept of an algorithm to be a plan that is completed within a finite number of steps. We will discuss this controversial generalization in another episode. Until then, please bear with us and instead call it what you want. A cooking recipe is much like this generalized take on an algorithm. A decision might look like a good one in the local time of this very moment, only to be revealed as a mistake in the non-local future. Greedy algorithms are algorithms that make the most locally optimal decision. Let's say you're a traveling salesman, and you need to visit a list of cities in a limited time. How do you find the shortest path between each city? A greedy algorithm might say you should always visit the closest unvisited city. However, if you do that, you might end up having to retrace your steps to get back to a city you skipped. Not all heuristics are greedy. One might also want to subcontract out their greed. In order for a heuristic to always be reliable, it must be universal. It must be in some way invariant across all scales of problems and across all localities. In order for you to be universal, you need to be able to find out not only where cognitive bias and heuristics work, but also when they fail. This pushes the problem of cognitive biases into a higher order, and it might render your menagerie of fallacies and biases useless. If the argument rests on a greedy algorithm, then it's not much of an argument. It's just another thoughtless war over resources. Thank you.